All right. I want to revisit the James Harden trade and sort of how it's playing out because I think we have a couple weeks or maybe a week or so of Harden playing and it's looked really good. So I want to start by saying that. The 76ers are 4-0 with James Harden in the lineup. James Harden's averaging pretty much 27 points per game, 12 assists per game, 7.5 rebounds per game on almost 60% from the field, 50% from three, and 90% from the line. We know those percentages are not sustainable. He's not going to shoot 50 from three or 60 from the field. He's doing a good job getting to the free throw line. I think Philly as a whole is kind of living at the free throw line with him and Embiid. They are just shooting an insane amount of free throws per game. And you might say it's boring to watch, which I do think it is. I don't think that makes the game fun, but it's a strategy that works, at least in the regular season. We can talk about what we think about that for the playoffs. But I think it goes to say we do have to be a little skeptical of the 4-0 record for two reasons. The first reason, they've played Cleveland, the Knicks twice, and the Timberwolves, which isn't exactly, the fiercest competition out there. But between Harden, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid, the Phillies like we can call them their big three. It looks pretty good. All three guys have had at least 20 points in all four of the games. Maxey looks like he's a huge beneficiary, which there was a question mark about when the trade happened. His efficiency has kind of gone through the roof. He's shooting the ball really well. Again, at an unsustainable rate, but with so much attention being paid to Harden and Embiid, Maxey's really seeing a lot of open lanes. He's getting a lot of open looks, and he's capitalizing on that. That's the key. I think one piece that's kind of still up in the air, or at least for the first week hasn't looked as great as people might have thought, is the Tobias Harris piece. He looks a little bit lost in the offense, a little bit timid. We don't really know what his role is going to be, and I wouldn't be surprised. I've already read reports that the Sixers are looking to move him in the summer. They're going to explore trade opportunities for Tobias. Um, yeah, what do you think about the New Look Sixers? What are your thoughts?
I think the New Look Sixers look pretty good. I know it's been a small sample size, 4 games or so. They beat the T Wolves, Knicks twice, and Cleveland.
Yep.
But you know what? Good teams, they're supposed to be able to run through these teams with ease, and I don't think Philadelphia has really struggled at all. Now, whatever they do in the regular season obviously won't matter because they'll be judged in the postseason. But even just looking at some of the numbers, I think in these games compared to Harden's season averages, he's averaging 2.5 more free throws per game. So that's just him solely. But Embiid now, in these last 4 games, he's averaging just over 5 free throws more per game than he has in his season.
Yeah,
So if
they're
these guys
living
are
at the line.
hitting, yeah, if these guys are hitting like 85, 90%, that's like 7 more free points they're getting at the line.
Their offense has been unstoppable since he's gotten there. I think they're averaging like 125 points per 100 possessions, or like 126 or something like that. I read
They
that
are,
today.
yeah.
And it's just an insane offense.
But even like Harden, he's getting more field goals made per game on almost 4 less attempts in these 4 games compared to his season average. So he's definitely getting more crisper open looks as opposed to when he was in Brooklyn. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the pairing of him and Embiid, where that pick and roll is just lethal, where he's getting either the open look or the easy pass, right? And it is an easy pass because he's averaging 3 turnovers a game as opposed to close to 5 at 4.6, which he was during the season. So there's obviously it's good to see that they've really meshed early because this would have looked bad for Philly if this was the other way around and they would have lost 4 straight and would have had issues. But right now it's just smooth sailing. They're taking care of business and they're just marching towards being one of the top seeds in the Eastern Conference. With regards to Tobias Harris, I don't take too much stock into that only because the Knicks have been winning by a lot of points, so they necessarily haven't really needed him. So he
You
just
mean the
has been the
Sixers?
odd man out, right?
You mean the
Here.
Sixers have been winning by a lot of points, right?
Yeah, sorry. They've been winning by a lot of points. They really haven't had to include him, whereas maybe if teams or better teams lock up defensively, like obviously God would trust that coaching or in a playoff series, like once you play a team 7 times in a row, 4 to 7 times in a row, they'll figure something out at least on how to slow them down. So Tobias Harris will have to get more involved. He'll be more put into the scheme and more of a focal point. But right now, when they're like steamrolling teams like this, you don't really even need to get him involved. So depending on how he is mentally and if he's okay with the role he's in, I think Tobias Harris is probably one of those guys that he's a veteran player. He's more concerned about winning a ring than he is about his own personal production.
So I also want to touch on. I said there was two reasons to be skeptical of the Sixers start. I agree with the Tobias Harris take. I do think it's important to get him involved so he can kind of figure out his role and figure out where he needs to attack, what his job is in this offense in terms of how he can be effective and help the team. But I think the thing I wanted to touch on, the second reason why I think we should be really skeptical is historically, if you look at Harden's starts with his new teams. So this goes all the way back to when he joined Houston, then again when he joined Brooklyn, and now again when he joined Philly. Harden, we all know that, or at least we've seen that Harden's ability to be a dominant basketball player is kind of dependent on how committed and invested he is in the game and in the team. I think when you're mentally detached, it's harder to contribute. It's harder to be effective. We saw that when Harden quit on Houston. We saw that when Harden quit on Brooklyn. He was having terrible games. He had the 4 point game against Sacramento. Like when he quits, when he's mentally not there, he's done. He's out. He's not really gonna be effective. So I think this is kind of the honeymoon phase, which is why I want to be a little skeptical. They haven't really faced any adversity yet, and Harden always comes out the gates just sort of like full throttle, guns blazing when he's on a new roster and he's in a situation where that he wants to be in, which is the case with Philly. Like this is where he wanted to go. This is the trade that he wanted. So I think we should expect him to have a good start. But I did think he looked a little washed. I know I said that on the pod, the first podcast, that the trade deadline recap, where I thought, Harden's having a down year statistically, and he looks a little slower. And he still does to me in terms of the eye test, but the numbers say otherwise. And so I have to go by the numbers. And he's obviously had an amazing start to his career with Philly. So I was wrong about that. It looks like he's the same Harden of old, and he just duped us. He made it look like he was regressing, but he really and truly, it's clear that now that he just wanted out. He didn't want to be with Brooklyn anymore, and he just wanted to be with Philly. But I want to ask you, watching Philly play this past week, are they your favorites to come out of the East?
Ooh, that's a good question. No, I don't think so.
So you still think they can't win the East?
I wouldn't be surprised if they won the East. I just don't have them as my favorite to win the East.
Okay. Who's
Yeah,
your
like
favorite
they're,
though?
they're a capable team. But let me just touch on a few things.
Okay.
So you're saying that there's still a concern that Harden comes out the gate strong. With the Brooklyn scenario, yeah, I can blame him for it. But to be fair, like that team is just dysfunctional in itself, and the Kyrie situation, that's really out of his control. Like you can't force him to get vaccinated or force him to play, stuff like that. And if that was really like the sole reason why he was concerned over Brooklyn, he was just promised probably by the team, a scenario that wasn't really realistic, and he was kind of cluing into that in the regular season now. And you can even see with Brooklyn, like Ben Simmons isn't even playing yet, Kyrie still isn't. Like it's still all up in the air. With him quitting on Houston, I don't really want to put too much on him there because he played there for a long time, and he kind of put Houston back on the map to the point where they were a perennial contender in the West. Houston sort of took I guess, the villain role where like nobody really wanted to see them win or beat the Warriors because they just go to the free throw line a lot, right? They definitely had competitive teams there where he was the main focal point on. And I think he got to the point where he realized like it doesn't really matter what he does, they just can't beat the Warriors. Like his peak was with Chris Paul, and then he realized, okay, our window's done.
I think my skepticism comes from they're just not playing tough teams, and the true test of your chemistry and your character as a team, as an individual, comes from when you face adversity. They
Yep.
haven't really faced any adversity yet, and Harden,
No,
we
that
we
that's
now
the
have.
thing. Like I just want to say, like I didn't think he's that much of a quitter. Like the Brooklyn thing is kind of a weird situation because that team dynamic is not everyone's fully invested. And for Houston, I thought he, really solidified like whatever legacy he has in his career as being a star level player there. But with regards to would I be surprised if they or would I consider them a favorite in the East? They haven't faced any of that adversity. And in the postseason, like we've already mentioned, that's where the game really slows down. It's more of a half court offense. Typically, there's way less free throws, right? They
Yeah,
won't be getting this type of regular season treatment. So then when I'm looking at the figures right now, he's shooting almost borderline 60% from the floor, which is not going to happen against playing better teams, not just, what is that? Well, I guess Cleveland's a playoff team, but you know what I mean? Like he's not going
yeah.
to shoot
Cleveland's
60% in the
Cleveland's
postseason.
struggling, and yeah, he's not shooting 60%
He
against
won't get the free
Milwaukee.
throws. And then it's going to come down to can he get a bucket, like an actual field goal? And prior to joining Philly, he was a 42% shooter.
Right.
So he's going to have to overcome those hurdles. On the bright side, he's not the best option, or he could be the best option, but he's not the sole option on the Sixers. And we already discussed how Embiid's pretty much a mismatch for everybody, anyways.
Right.
But this is just like a wait and see approach. We'll see how it goes in the playoffs, and they probably won't really get tested until round two.
So I don't want to jump the gun and call them my favorites just yet because I still think Milwaukee is a little bit better than them. They're kind of tried and tested, and cohesion and chemistry matters. And I think Milwaukee has the continuity of a championship contender where they pretty much brought back their roster from last year. I read a report today saying Brook Lopez is resuming 5-on-5 activity soon if he hasn't already resumed it. So there's a chance that Milwaukee gets even healthier, gets a key piece in Brook Lopez back. I just don't want to I don't want to jump the gun and say Philly's the favorite because you have to give Milwaukee their respect. But with this trade and the way they've been playing, albeit against weak competition, Philly looks really dangerous. They really do look like a really good team. And the key thing that I sort of see is the players look happy. They look like there was a weight lifted off their shoulders with this trade of Ben Simmons and just resolving this whole situation surrounding the team. And with James Harden's like sort of happiness that he brought in terms of being traded to a new situation to one that he wanted to be in. Like you said, that Brooklyn situation, they're just dysfunctional over there, and I think we have concerns about how happy Harden really was in that situation.
Yeah.
So the whole team spirit in the game just looks a lot better. Guys are happier, they're more loose, they're playing more freely, and I think that's important, right?
Let me just add on team spirit here. Because I know at the time of this recording, James Harden's not playing tonight because of left hamstring management. And we've seen
Yeah,
this fall apart a couple years ago. I don't know if you remember when the Clippers were the favorite, and all of a sudden reports came out that people were upset that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were getting the star treatment. When do
yes,
you
I
think it'll
remember.
be a problem for the role players when Embiid is taking nights off for maintenance, Harden has this hamstring management, but everybody else is expected to really carry the load? You know what I mean? It's going to be an interesting dynamic, and we'll see if the actual clubhouse is all happy and motivated to play.
I think that's a good point. I think that's something we have to watch going forward, and it can play out two ways, right? Like it can play out the way you said with the Clippers, where guys weren't happy, and it started to affect team chemistry because some players thought that other players weren't working as hard or they weren't as invested or committed to the team and what everybody else was doing. It basically was unfair. But then you also had the Raptors in their championship year with Kawhi, where it was kind of brought up in that interview with Kyle
So,
Lowry and Kawhi Leonard. They had stuff going on behind the scenes. They just didn't let the media know about it. And guys understood that, okay, when Kawhi does play, he shows up to play. So
but
I think it really depends on how the players and management and coaches all handle it. And
the reason I bring this up is because that coach on the Clippers was Doc Rivers.
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I'm not a Doc Rivers fan at all. I think I don't think he's a
Oh,
good
I
coach.
know.
So it'll be interesting. But you know what? I will say Doc Rivers, as I don't think he's a good coach, and as bad of a coach as I do think he is, I have to give him credit for personality management and player like management in terms of connecting with players. That is part of coaching. That's part of his job. He was able to do it well in Boston, although he had KG helping him with that quite a bit.
I think that's a bit overblown. I mean, it would have been his job to connect with Ben Simmons too, right?
That's true. He did throw Ben Simmons under the bus a little bit. I mean, I
Like
think that
for an
he's
overrated
just as much to
coach,
blame.
he's been gifted some pretty good rosters. Like I don't think he's
Yeah.
really taken scraps to a
Oh,
competitive state.
there's no doubt he's an underachieving coach. There's no doubt. He should be doing a lot better with the rosters that he's had, for sure. But I just, you know what? It'll be interesting. I think it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, how this all gets managed in terms of resting their stars and how the rest of the team feels about it. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But the takeaway from the trade, at least my initial thoughts, they are a legitimate Eastern Conference contender and probably Milwaukee's biggest threat.
No, I agree too. But at the same time, I thought Philadelphia was a contender even before Harden. It's just going to really shape up in the playoffs and see how it really goes.
It'll be fun. I think it's going to be fun to see come the playoffs. Can't wait.